Okay, Lynn, the next question comes from Russia, from a long-time supporter of ours there, who operates in various influential circles. And he says, I know that Mr. LaRouche is a sincere friend of the Russians, and that he has been aware for a long time of the hidden story behind perestroika, and that he both saw and understood very early on the disgusting essence of the so-called reforms under Gorbachev and Yeltsin. While I have many background questions about that, today I really want to ask something which is on the minds of people here, and I would imagine on the minds of people all over the world. I would like to ask about what is happening in Tunisia. Many people in Russia are drawing parallels between those events and what might very well occur in Russia and perhaps in other nations soon. The current events in Tunisia, what are being called their Jasmine Revolution, in yet another colored revolution in the series that has unfolded in the past Soviet era. My question is it that? Was it inspired from the West? Or is it a natural reaction of the Tunisians themselves to the totality of events, including not only the dictatorship there, but more importantly, the economic crisis? Because there are reports that the current unrest began after a sharp rise of prices of basic necessities, and then in response, the tightening of the screws by the former head of state, who has now fled. Obviously, in the midst of global hyperinflation, this is an extremely important question, and I'd like to know your views on this.
Well, just take a step back first. Don't assume there's such a thing as a Tunisian problem. There is a disease in Tunisia, but the bacillus is everywhere. What you have another case. Take another case. A case in the state of Arizona. A young guy gets himself some weapons and kills some people. And to me, there's nothing mysterious about this. All I have to do is look at our culture in the United States and look at it in terms of generations. You have probably about 1/3 of the generation under 18, or under 20 perhaps, are a type which are like this young fellow who pulled off this atrocity in Tucson. We have Tucson cases saturating about 1/3, potentially, of the generation of that age group. Huh? Oh, so you're not looking at a Tunisian problem. You're looking at a cultural problem which is throughout the world and with varying expressions, in which a younger generation is coming up which is scarcely human in terms of its culture. This is not Tunisia. It's in every part of the world. And those parts of the world which are more oriented to the what you find in the transatlantic community or the trans-Mediterranean community are the worst. It's where people believe in the values of these two generations, or we call them successive degenerations from the boomer generation on down. And they are successive degenerations to a large degree. Young people around the world, especially in the transatlantic region, are much more demoralized than they are in some other parts of the world. And you see this spreading into Japan. You see it spread into other countries which once had a vigorous industrial, technological progress orientation. and the section of the population which still has that orientation is shrinking. And the youngest generation have been born into a generation where they're told that they're in a green society. And those young people who've been conditioned to believe in a green society are the most demoralized, and demoralized in the sense of a lack of real morality. So now you take young people who have no sense of the meaning of life. Look at what they believe. Look at what their culture is. Look at their behavior. Would you want them in your backyard? Like this kid? You take about 1/3 of the entire generation of that age group in the United States today. And we don't know what kind of monsters are going to come up in the next batch. Because we are that. See, the tendency is everybody likes to think of people as being like monkeys or something. Each individual monkey is supposed to have its own culture or something, its own behavior. We are influenced by the culture. We're influenced by the culture we're part of. Societies always have had generational characteristics of cultures. A family is what? 4 generations. At least 3 generations. And it's the development of the culture, the orientation of the culture. We have an anti-work culture. We have an anti-progress culture. We have a green influence culture. And a greenie is on the way to degeneracy. If you don't believe in developing let me just take one step back. Look, mankind, as I said in this report, this statement, mankind's nature is different than that of the animal. Absolutely different. The animals have no voluntary capacity to develop a culture. All animal species have a fixed potential population density, or relatively fixed, depending on their circumstances. And they have a culture, an animal culture. But they don't have a voluntary culture like human beings. They don't have a voluntarily creative potential that human beings do. Now, the human being has expanded its population greatly on this planet relative to any other species. This means that we are using raw materials. What are the raw materials we use? The raw materials we use are chiefly relics of living processes. We get iron, which was not concentrated in some place originally on this planet. We get iron because living processes, which had a living chemistry with iron in them, and these unicellular animals concentrated, and when they died, they would deposit the iron in their bodies. But they had gathered this iron. Many of them had been gathered by oceans, where the creatures had congregated in areas, in waters. And they died as unicellular animals or plants. And they concentrated certain minerals in certain places. We come along as human beings. We find an area like the Mississippi Range in the United States. There's a lot of iron there. Why is it there? Because dead animals left their bodies there. Now, what do? We go out and we extract the richest iron, richest concentration of iron. We go where the iron ore is the richest. We ignore the others at first. Then we find that we're using up the richest iron ore concentrations, so we have to use poorer iron ore. Now, this requires more technology. It requires more development of power, more utilization of energy flux density as power. So therefore, for mankind to live, mankind becomes more complex, more interdependent, interactive skills. Man develops a culture, but man is above all voluntary. Man invents discoveries of principle on which mankind is able to live as man. So therefore, what happens? If you go to a green society, in effect, or to a fixed society, which is called the oligarchical model in ancient society, where you keep the masses of the people stupid, give them limited skills, do not allow them to know these things, do not allow themselves to be educated, to develop. You keep them as cheap labor. The oligarchical principle. Control the size of the population for the comfort of the ruling class. That's where this problem comes from. So now what we've done, under the influence of Teddy Roosevelt and others British types, we have decided to go against power. Now, the only way the human race can survive against resources is to increase the energy flux density of the technology used. That means tear down every damn windmill and destroy every solar collector in the United States. Because these technologies are low energy flux density technologies. They're wasteful. And if you want to maintain that technology, you must reduce the population of the human race. You must commit genocide, like the World Wildlife Fund does. Genocide. You must go green. Genocide. Mass murder. Depravity. Now, what we're doing is we have a society. Do these young people, like this poor fruitcake, do they have a sense of themselves, of moving upward, of learning skills, of developing technology? Do they have a sense of a mission in life, of improving the power of the human race to exist, to sustain itself and care for itself? They don't. So what do you expect? Look at this case of Tunisia. In this location, what was the problem? A decline in culture. Imposed by what? By prevailing policies, social policies, and economic policies. So wherever we go, see windmills, whether in the mouths of politicians or not, wherever we see these kinds of green policies, we're seeing the destruction of civilization. And the destruction of civilization means that you want to reduce the amount of population, you want to reduce their role, their technology, and their development. Reduce their sense of a purpose in life as a human being. Now, what is that happening all over the world? Of course it's happening all over the world. And that's why the British and Obama hate China. China is violating the rule. China is insisting on maintaining a stable economy. They're doing it roughshod, which is not difficult to understand. But they're developing their society. And the British hate that. The United States is hated by the British, especially because we speak English. Because we know how to hate each other. Their society, the typical British citizen, from what I see on the screen, is wider than they are tall. It's a cultural thing. It's not a biological thing. It's cultural. It's a population which has lost its sense of purpose in life, which is just living out and trying to vegetate, shall we say. And that's what our problem is. The problem is not Tunis. The problem is global. And the problem is the British Empire. The British Empire is dying. Let it die in its present form. We can take the poor sods, as they call them, of England and so forth. We can take the poor sods and retool them we do a better, kinder thing for them than they will do for themselves. That is to get them back to becoming to an American standard of outlook, or what used to be an American standard of outlook, is to simply say, we're going to be a productive nation. We're not going to be a parliament empire. We're going to be a productive nation, which has a sense of dignity and purpose in life, because we're doing something good for humanity. We're making things better, which is what the Americans used to think. And the problem is these young kids out there, like this thing in Tucson, they've lost that. They've been thrown into the garbage pail. Don't blame them. They were thrown into the garbage pail. By whom? Well, in this case, they were thrown into the garbage pail by two presidents, George W. Bush Jr. and Obama, and Al Gore to the extent he was able to do it. We have been destroyed. We've been destroying our young people. And this is happening throughout the world. In this case in Tunisia, the story on this thing where the thing broke out, it broke out in an area which had gone through the effects of a decline, a demoralizing decline and a collapse of what had been earlier a much more developed area. And you see it all over the place, all around the planet. And what's being done to Africa is typical of that, same thing. So these are the problems. There is no Tunisian problem. There's a problem, there's a disease from London, which has been spread from London into Tunis.